Good morning, DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us today. Great program coming up. It's a Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All Tuesday. Jeff Sintel will be here to give us an update on everything he saw in San Antonio, the commitment of Tyreek Stevenson, and what's next for Georgia's 2019 class. We'll also preview our big event tonight, Marlowe's in Dunwoody, our countdown to signing day event, as we get ready for a really exciting culmination of Georgia's 2019 recruiting cycle. All that's on the way. As you might imagine, we'll have a couple thoughts on last night's national championship game on today's show. I want to react to the, I think, fantastic tweet from a five-star running back and redshirt freshman Zamir White, who, as Connor Riley pointed out this morning in his Good Day UGA piece, I think really gets Georgia fans a little bit excited about what's to come for the upcoming season. We're going to have a really, really great show. We'll have some more on some of those Jim Chaney rumors a little bit here, too, and the great reporting that Mike Griffith was able to do yesterday on that. It is all on the way as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Later on in today's program, I'm going to give you an update on the big event for us tonight, Marlowe's in Dunwoody. You're going to want to be a part of this. I love these things. We call them Countdown to Signing Day, and it really is a great way to get ready for the close of the 2019 recruiting cycle for Georgia. A lot of the hay already in the barn. More to come by the time February is all said and done. Jeff Sintel will give us a big update on that tonight at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. And as a preview of all that, he'll join us here in a couple of moments. Also, in really just a few seconds, a couple minutes from now, there is one really big point I want to make about last night's national championship game, because I don't know if you kind of came away with this with the same sort of realization as I did. There's a really good chance you didn't. Some of you may not even like what I have to say about this, but there was one point for me that was unmissable, unescapable when you looked at last night's national championship game. I'll get to that in a moment. Before that, though, a few smaller points. There are, I think, a few takeaways from watching Clemson just completely dismantle Alabama last night that leaves you, I think, as a Georgia fan, feeling very hopeful that Georgia can be close to doing the same thing. Much the same way that Clemson hoisted a national championship trophy again last night, it's easy to envision a future in which Georgia does that same very thing with its own national championship trophy if it can replicate some of the things that Clemson used to its advantage last night. The first of those things for me is, and I think pretty much everybody kind of sees this the same way, the way that Clemson's front seven really got after Tua Tagovailoa last night was an example of what Georgia needs more of this next season. Georgia, over the course of Kirby Smart's 3 years of the program, has been a good defensive team. But good is a word that I use on purpose, stopping just short of saying great. I don't know that Georgia yet has been great defensively, because when you talk about the word great in a defensive context, I think one of the things you're talking about is wreaking havoc, being in the backfield, creating tackles for loss, creating sacks, tipping passes, making life miserable on an opposing quarterback. And last night, I do think you saw the difference between a good defense, or even a very good defense, what Georgia has been, and a great defense, and what Clemson was last night, in terms of absolutely making Alabama's life miserable, and absolutely specifically making Alabama quarterback Tua Tagovailoa's life miserable. That was one of the key takeaways from that game. Now, when you think about Georgia for next season, you certainly see some opportunities for this to happen. I think, all expect Nolan Smith, who looked great in the All-American Bowl in San Antonio this past Saturday, we all expect him to play a major role in Georgia's defense next season. I think that we expect a guy like Jermaine Johnson, a junior college transfer, one of those guys whose body is already a little more developed, whose football mentality is probably a little bit more seasoned. I think that he's going to be ready to go. He's going to be ready to contribute next season. To say nothing of what we think that some of the rising sophomores in this team, guys like Adam Anderson and Brenton Cox, may be able to do. I'm talking about mostly pass rushers here, but obviously the defensive line is going to continue to take shape as well. But in terms of being in the backfield more and getting more tackles for loss, doing more of what Clemson did to Tua Tagovailoa last night, and to Georgia's credit, when DeAndre Walker was healthy, they did a lot of those things in the SEC championship game too. But I think that you saw the way that a dominant, fierce, ferocious pass rush can make a big impact in the game last night. I think in 2019, Georgia has a chance to resemble that a little bit more, the way that Clemson was able to do that last night. The other thing here that I think is a key takeaway from this game, and if you're a Georgia fan looking for reasons why maybe your team in the future is doing what Clemson did last night, Did you watch the play of Justin Ross, the terrific freshman Clemson wide receiver, when Alabama tried to match Clemson's pass rush with a pass rush of its own? We saw that create one-on-one opportunities, and we saw Ross, the outstanding freshman, who, by the way, Clemson takes out of the state of Alabama for the class of 2018. We saw that guy dominate in those one-on-one opportunities. Now, here's one thing you don't, want to hear me say, but honesty, compels me to admit it's one of the reasons why I wanted Georgia to get Jaden Hazelwood as bad as I did, because I do believe that Hazelwood has a chance to do that at the college level. That didn't happen. That's water under the bridge now, which sort of fast forwards you to who Georgia has. J.J. Holloman's a guy that's already proven some of those capabilities in the second year of the program. Maybe he takes another step in that regard in year 3. But for me, I'm probably most hopeful about the incoming freshman Dominic Blaylock, just because Blaylock's credentials as a high school receiver are similar to, what a guy like Ross's were, similar in that regard. We saw him score a couple of touchdowns in the All-American Bowl on Saturday. We've seen him put up together a big year at a Walton High School in the Atlanta area. I think that when you look to the future where facing one-on-one coverage, when a pass rush tries to blitz the quarterback, tries to blitz Jake Fromm, is there a wide receiver on the Georgia roster that can really make the opposing defense pay for that? It's one of the reasons why Clemson got an easy victory last night. And in the future for Georgia, it's a guy like Dominic Blaylock who I think has a chance to really do that. A lot of hopes by Georgia fans will be pinned on Blaylock to do that next season. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of us are really excited about seeing him when he arrives on the Georgia campus. One more point in terms of what you saw from Clemson last night that Georgia can also use to its advantage. When you think about one of the things that separates Clemson from a lot of other programs is they've been able to hold on to Brent Venables, their defensive coordinator, now for a while. He is making, I think, over $2 million now coaching that defense, and probably had chances to go be a head coach somewhere else, and has just kind of chosen not to do that, chosen to stay at Clemson. Every time he chooses to stay, he gets raises, and all of a sudden now he's built for himself a pretty good life as a DC in a way that really in previous generations of coaching, you probably wouldn't have seen someone do this. You had to become a head coach to get the big raise, to really take care of your family the way that you wanted to do it. That kind of money required you moving on and taking a new job. But at Clemson, that's a program that said, if you'll remain loyal to us, we're going to reward you with what used to be considered head coaching money, and we're not going to give you any reason why you have to leave and go somewhere else. There's no doubt that the scheme that Venables seemed to be throwing last night in Alabama was baffling to Tungo Vailoa. And by the way, this is maybe a different conversation for a different time, but Tua not exactly looking great against the best defenses he's seen this season. Didn't look great against Georgia in the SEC championship game. Didn't look great against Clemson last night. Maybe Tua's got a little allergy when it comes to these elite defenses. When you're not picking on Arkansas and Ole Miss and teams like that, all of a sudden Tua doesn't exactly look like the Tua that the hype would have suggested us over the course of the first 6 games of the season. But nonetheless, Brent Venables' defense last night really found a way to get that done. And I can't help but think about, once again, Georgia in that regard there as well. That Georgia's facing an offseason where there's a lot of rumors. So-and-so may be going here, and so-and-so may be going there. I'm talking about coaches, who could potentially be on the move. We'll talk more about Jim Chaney later on in our program. But you really see that, if Georgia can find a way to kind of give the raises necessarily to hold on to some of these guys who've made such a big impact in the in the recruitment of the program, you get the sense that Georgia can also build something that lasts for a while. We always do the Georgia-Alabama comparison, but Clemson showed you last night it is also a program worth, trying to replicate. Worth trying to match and do what it's done. And the continuity of keeping a guy like Brent Venables as the defensive coordinator for as long as Dabo Swinney has done, that has certainly helped them do that there in that regard. So those are some ways in which I think that if you're a Georgia fan, you look in on Clemson and you can say, oh, if we just do this, this, and this, maybe Georgia can also be in that national championship conversation in the future. But for me, there's an even bigger takeaway than that. And this is the thing that I think not everyone's going to agree with, but I have to admit, as I was watching the game, and quick story here, I go to bed really early, so, I got sleepy, around the midpoint of the third quarter last night. I set the game to record, woke up this morning to watch the end of it. I wake up really early, too, and I fully expected to watch an Alabama comeback unfold, and Alabama to come back and win this game. It never happened. Clemson extended its lead, late in the game, ends up, walking away in dominant fashion. As I'm watching that game early this morning, the ending portion of that game, there was one thought that was sort of overwhelming me more than anything else, especially listening to Dabo Swinney in his post-game remarks as he had the microphone stuck in his face there at the end of that game. He just seems to be having fun. And if you go back and look at Clemson over the course of the last year, they have seemingly been having fun this entire time. They don't seem to be as stressed out as we seem to get. And by we, I don't mean Georgia the team, I mean DawgNation. Because if you listen to our comment section on a given day, or if you see my responses on Twitter at DawgNation Daily on a given day, man, this year, people have been angry about everything. And it's, if Georgia won a game by 30, why didn't it win it by 300? If Georgia ran for 300 yards, why didn't it throw the tight ends more? If Georgia, threw the ball, why aren't they, whatever. It's always something. And at Clemson, they just seem to be loose and sort of enjoying life. And when you see that attitude work against a team like Alabama that sets the standard for the opposite kind of thing, Saban never seems to enjoy anything. I got to tell you, watching that game unfold last night, I started to wonder, maybe Georgia's been trying to copy the wrong program. Maybe Georgia, instead of trying to be just like Alabama, ought to try to be a little more like Clemson. Instead of making everything sort of a life or death struggle, maybe Georgia should just relax and loosen up a little bit more. Because the tense moments of, demanding perfection at every turn, so far that hasn't really worked. And last night for Alabama, that didn't really work either. Ultimately, the end results for games are somewhat difficult to control. But how you behave in those moments can be a little easier to control. So, I don't know where that lands with you, but I do think, in a weird way, I saw something last night I didn't expect to see. Clemson winning, first of all, was a surprise. But the feeling I got after Clemson won was an even bigger surprise than that. Listen, I still consider Clemson to be a Georgia rival, so I don't like saying good things about Clemson. But I will say this just to wrap up this particular portion of our conversation. The end result for me is I actually think the Clemson win last night was good for college football. Because I think it sets in motion the possibility that there's more than one way to achieve success in the sport. You don't have to be miserable at every turn. You don't have to be obsessed to the point you can't enjoy anything. You can actually be a little bit like Dabo Swinney and enjoy life. I don't know if that'll lead to a national championship for Georgia anytime soon, but it might make some of us enjoy the journey a little more. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, live on video this morning, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon as well, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form, wherever you can find podcasts. Let me just say this. We're going to hear from Jeff Sintel in a moment. But before that, I do, if you're anywhere near the Atlanta area, or you can get anywhere near the Atlanta area by the time tonight rolls around, we'd love to have you join us for our Countdown to Signing Day event, 6 p.m. tonight at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. If you're watching on video, I'll throw this on the screen for you, give you a chance to see this address. It's 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. Please write that down, put that in your device, however you get directions somewhere. Be there with us tonight from 6 to 8 p.m., 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. A great chance for you to find out the backstory of how this 2019 class is coming together for Georgia. Jeff is always great in these situations, and I'm sure tonight he will be very much the same way. So really good stuff with Jeff coming up later on tonight for our Countdown to Signing Day event at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. I cannot wait to have you there. If you follow me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, you may have seen on Saturday me reacting to a pretty cool tweet from Georgia running back Zamir White. And I want to make that the subject of our Around the Doghouse here today, as it's brought to you on Tuesdays by Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa, a beautiful place, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. But Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa brings you Around the Doghouse. And on Saturday, I tweeted out the great tweet from Zamir White, who showed a picture of himself running with the football. That's a vision a lot of Georgia fans hope they get a chance to see again really soon. And Zamir White certainly teases that possibility, as right there on top of that photo of him running with the football, he's got the hourglass emoji. Even someone like me, who's not the most technically proficient person in the world, can understand what that means. He says the clock is ticking and the time is coming in which Zamir White is sort of reintroduced to the world after missing this past season with another ACL tear. And boy, that gets you really excited about that possibility. And one of the questions I get asked a lot when we do comments on video or when I see people at Marlowe's Taverns or things like that is, can we really expect Zamir White, who did miss this past season with a knee injury, can we really expect him to be healthy and return to that form that he showed back in high school when he was the nation's #1 running back? And I think the best way to understand this and the best way to know what really is a possibility for White, if he could be in a spot like Alabama and Clemson were last night in the national championship game, is to go back and look at some of the things that have been said about White in the past. Now, if you want to go back to this past spring, where White was not particularly active during spring practice because of a previous knee injury that he had suffered near the end of his high school season, even at that point in time, knowing that he was still recovering from an injury, Kirby Smart was already striking a little bit of a hopeful tone about the injury recovery that was taking place. Let's go back to the spring and hear Kirby Smart kind of laying the groundwork for what he thought Zamir White was going to do before White had another setback with another ACL injury. Here is Kirby Smart from back during the spring.
Yeah, it's hard for me to answer because I am not a doctor. I don't know. He certainly looks good right now. He's progressing along. He's maybe ahead of where we expected him to be. But to say he's going to be there fall camp ready to go, I don't know that. I mean, you guys will get to see him out there. He'll probably be doing some individual drills. You make your own assessment because I think that's the challenge for us is not knowing where he's going to be and also the health of our 3 current backs coming out of spring practice.
So what you see there from Kirby Smart's a little bit of let's wait and see. Let's wait and see how this goes in terms of what Zamir White's actually going to be. But by the time summer came around, White was getting to practice a little bit, and Georgia players were noticing what he was capable of doing, including tight end Isaac Nada. In one of the instances in which Nada met with the media, Nada let it be known that, you know what, this is a guy that does have a chance at Georgia to be pretty special. Here's Nada.
He's got to be careful with what he does. He's still rehabbing and things, but you can see, he's got a lot of talent and a lot of upside and a big physical kid too. So when he gets up and rolling around really good, it's going to be really fun to see.
It's going to be really fun to see, and Georgia fans didn't get to see that this past season. But in 2019, they feel like they may get a chance to do just that, and White's tweet certainly makes you feel pretty good about that. The most interesting thing, though, that was said about Zamir White was also said by Kirby Smart when he was talking about somebody else. Now, this is really important. This really matters. I'm out of time on this segment, though, so let me do this. Let me wait and do that later on in the program if you don't mind, because if you really want to feel good but the possibility of Zamir White, what he might be able to do in 2019, it's something that Kirby Smart said when he maybe didn't quite mean to say it that might matter here more than anything else. So we'll do that later on in our program. It's Around the Doghouse presented by Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa, and I've been there. Let me tell you something. This time of year especially, when you get that little nip in the air, they've got this huge fireplace, a couple of these huge fireplaces right there in the lobby in the restaurant. You'll talk about one of the great places to go during this time of the year when you get a chance to sort of sit by that roaring fire with the mountains in the background. One of the most beautiful places you can ever be a part of is Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa right there in beautiful Towns County, Georgia, with those mountains all around you. Go to BrasstownValley.com. You can find out more about why so many people have chosen this as a great getaway destination, just a short drive from the Atlanta area. So check out Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. We appreciate them being a part of Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily. All right, I want to let you hear more of Kirby Smart on Zamir White later in the program. We've got an update on those Jim Chaney rumors later on the program too. But now, though, on a Tuesday, especially as a preview for Marlowe's tonight, let's talk to Jeff Sintel as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Good to have Jeff Sintel back on the program, and good to have Jeff Sintel back in the sort of capital of Dog Nation here in the city of Atlanta after a lot of time in Orlando and San Antonio. Jeff, appreciate you being back here with us today. Thanks for the travel you've done on behalf of Dog Nation over the course of the last couple of weeks, and looking forward to seeing you tonight at Marlowe's Tavern. Hope you're doing well.
It is definitely still, again, recruiting season, and I do look forward to seeing everybody at the event tonight at Marlowe's Tavern.
Yeah, looking forward to that as well. Let me, before we kind of get into the specific stuff with Georgia, I think a lot of people do have Clemson, Alabama on their mind last night just because we all watched that national championship game. And, Jeff, you and I think, have talked about this before, but, I can't get over this. When you watch Clemson last night be as dominant as it was, from an overall composite talent standpoint, the Georgia roster is already more talented than the Clemson roster, and yet Clemson last night looks like this otherworldly football team. How are they doing this without that commitment to go out and chase down these top 3, top 5 classes each and every year? They don't seem to stress over the numbers the way that teams like Georgia and Alabama do, who want to make sure their entire 85 scholarship, limit is filled with guys who have those 4- and 5-star capabilities, those potentials at NFL future. Clemson just doesn't really seem to be stressing about that much. Their overall roster strength is nowhere near what we think of these top SEC powers as having been, and yet they seem to have really good players at the position that really the positions that really matter. How are they doing that? I mean, how does that blueprint come together?
Well, I think it's a bunch of things there, Brandon. The main thing is I think that it's sort of a mirage when people kind of just go surface level and they look at the recruiting rankings, because Clemson does sign very talented players. I think the main thing there is that they're not signing the full 25 every year. Like we discussed this on the DawgNation forum. Look at Clemson's classes over the last 5 years. They go 7th, and that's starting in 2018, and they go 14th, 11th, 9th, and then 16th. And that's accomplished really basically by, everybody wonders about, are they getting the elite talent? Are they getting the 5 stars? Well, really the reason why those numbers are not higher is pretty simple. These reasons right here stand out to me. They only signed 17 players in 2018. They signed 16 in 2017. They signed 21 in 2016, 24 in 2015, and then 19 again in 2014. Here's what's happening. Dabo Swinney will not run players off to the extent that other schools do. The simple method there is if a player goes to Clemson, he goes to school, he works out, he's a good teammate, he's a good student, he's progressing towards his degree, then Clemson will not throw shade at him because of playing time. That coaching staff, I've heard this philosophy detailed to me. They feel that if a player can't play for Clemson, it's not Clemson's fault. It's the recruiter's fault. It's the position coach's fault for thinking that they were good enough to play for Clemson. And if that young man does everything that he's expected to do to be a Clemson Tiger, he's going to remain in the program, and that position group will just be weakened by a bad evaluation until that young man gets his degree. Very admirable quality. And I got another reason for you, Brandon, that'll probably just gut punch you. The reason why Clemson can go toe-to-toe with Alabama in a game like that is they throw the ball very well with elite talent everywhere, and they have a bunch of the nation's top 5 talents at receiver all across the depth chart right there. Yeah,
we talked about that before you joined us, Jeff. That was one of my big takeaways from the game, is that when you look at Justin Ross and the way that he just eviscerated that single coverage last night and, making safeties miss left and right when they came over to try to help out here, I mean, that is obviously one of the things that I think that Georgia needs more of is that guy who can really make a team really pay. When it tries to bring an extra pass rusher, when it tries to bring extra pressure on a quarterback, have that guy that creates that separation and make men miss. That's what Dominic Blaylock hopefully is going to be able to do for Georgia. But Georgia clearly needs that guy. I do think that's one of the things that Georgia was probably missing in 2018.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, hopefully most Georgia fans would probably want to sit there and look to a guy like Matt Landers or a guy like Tommy Bush. Those are guys that have maybe some of that Justin Ross speed. Remember, Justin Ross was the number 1 recruit in Alabama as well that got away. So I'm sure that was some especially potent vinegar in the stomach for a lot of Crimson Tide fans, seeing the top recruit out of the state of Alabama in Phoenix City provide several daggers to their defense of their national championship right there out in California. So I just think Clemson does things a very specific way. They get very good players. They don't sign a bunch of players. And really, Clemson's recruiting is a lot different, man. What they do is they tell their players when they're ready to commit, but then don't shop anywhere else. They don't allow their commitments to take visits. They don't allow committed players to other schools to come on an official visit as well, because they want to make sure there's something sincere there and not just a getafreetrip.com or something like that. So Clemson's way, folks got to remember, they built that beautiful new football palace, and now they've won 2 out of the last 3 national championships, and that includes 2 head-to-heads with the Alabama Crimson Tide and Coach Nick Saban.
Let me do one more thing on this subject, then I want to change the subject and talk about a couple of other different things. Is this going to catch up with them eventually? Because I think the number is they've only signed like 7 offensive linemen like the last 3 years. I may be slightly off on the number, but but the overall truth is still, the truth that, at some of these positions where you need to stockpile talent, they haven't exactly done that. Is this one of those things where as long as you've got a Deshaun Watson at quarterback or a Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, you can kind of hide some deficiencies, or the fact that they are a little thin at spots and where a program like Georgia would be petrified of being thin, does it catch up with them eventually? I mean, what would you say about that?
Well, I think the thing there is they're extremely fortunate, and I'm going to say fortunate in a specific way because they've hit on a lot of their guys like Mitch Hyatt, guys like Tremaine Ankrum. Those are guys out of the state of Georgia that start now for the Clemson Tigers. But what I mean by that is they also, those guys stick around. Mitch Hyatt was a 4-year starter, stayed around in Clemson, probably going to be a guard or a center at the next level, but didn't leave early. I mean, you look at their offensive line last night, if I remember, it goes senior. John Simpson would be a junior. Justin Fasanelli is a redshirt senior. Then the Gage kid is a redshirt junior, and then Tremaine Ankrum is also a junior at right tackle. So they've got a very, very experienced offensive line that, for the most part, is stuck around, and they've only got 1 or 2 5-stars in the 2 deep behind them. A guy like Jackson Carman, the freshman who spurned Ohio State to go to Clemson as well. They're very choosy, Brandon. And what it is when they do get their guy has to hit and become a player, because they don't play that risk management game that you prefer by getting 3 or 4 5-star tackles into the program, and then maybe 1 or 2 of those will hit big, and then everything looks rosy. And I think the other thing is just the quarterback position as well. Let's face it, Trevor Lawrence is very good. Trevor Lawrence has the arm talent to go over the top. But to me, it was a pretty simple blueprint about how to beat Alabama. Jake Fromm threw for 300-plus yards. Kyler Murray threw for 300-plus yards. And then Trevor Lawrence threw for 300-plus yards. The reasons why that happened is, one, Bama doesn't have an elite pass rush either, especially off the sides from pass rushers. They try to collapse the pocket. And then number 2, they have a very young defensive backfield that was susceptible to all those mistakes, like those simple fall-down plays where Justin Ross looked very good, but the man that was supposed to shadow him downfield fell down at the line. There's not much you can do with that.
In the very early days of DawgNation Daily, you and I actually talked about Trevor Lawrence a pretty good bit back then, and then shortly after that he committed to Clemson. We were actually talking about this before the show with our buddy Michael Carvel, who was kind of close to that story at the time as well. What are your memories of how close it could have come with Georgia actually securing a commitment from Lawrence at the time? What do you remember about that?
I think Georgia lost ground, much like they did with Deshaun Watson. They yielded full years of recruiting to an outside neighbor to come in and poach a guy like Trevor Lawrence. I think, what is that saying that Mama taught us in the South? If you can't say something nice about someone, don't say it at all. But I do think that final year of Mark Richt's recruiting, and let's just say the dubious recruiting decisions that were made by the brain trust there with picking certain players over guys like Davis Mills, over guys like Jake Fromm, that can include Trevor Lawrence as well. I just don't think Georgia handled recruiting the quarterback position very well at all near the tail end of the Mark Richt era. Now, of course, people will sit there and point to, what are you talking about, man? They had Jacob Eason coming in. Well, that, again, is another interesting evaluation as well, considering how Jacob Eason worked out in the SEC. I think right there, when Kirby arrived at Georgia, I recall that story greatly. I think that was one of the very first people he visited as a Georgia recruiter on the trail for Georgia. They went up there and they went to see Trevor Lawrence. That's just the way it is. Georgia didn't have, the momentum that Clemson did back when Trevor Lawrence was making his decisions. And you got to remember that 1 year that Trevor Lawrence had to evaluate Georgia was the 8-5 year, and not the 13-2 year out of 2017.
It's a fair evaluation. It's not necessarily what Georgia fans like to hear, but it's certainly a fair evaluation. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. Jeff will be doing more of that and looking ahead to the 2019 class tonight at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody starting at 6 p.m. Cannot wait for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. Hope you all, especially those of you who can be there in the Atlanta area, will make plans for us to be with us tonight from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody for our Countdown to Signing Day event. Jeff, Saturday was a big day for the Georgia program. It gets the commitment, and letter of intent signature from four-star defensive back Tyreek Stevenson. You and I just talked a lot about big-time receivers. The only way to negate those big-time receivers is to build yourself a big-time secondary. I think Stevenson really has a chance to do that at Georgia. I love the story you told about this on Saturday as part of our Before the Hedges special about how emotional his mom was about the decision for him to come to Georgia. She seems thrilled with that. Tell us more of the backstory, if you don't mind, about how all of this came to be and exactly what Georgia is getting when it comes to Stevenson as a player.
Yeah, guys, I want everybody to pay keen attention to the site today. I guess I'm going to call it Tyreek Tuesday because we've got DawgNation has got two pretty memorable pieces of content. I'm just going to leave it at that regarding the Tyreek Stevenson story. It's one thing. I mean, I can probably tell you 19 things about Tyreek Stevenson over the course of a couple of stories. But there's one thing that you'll learn today on DawgNation.com that really impressed me about Tyreek. Everybody saw the picture last night of Kirby Smart. I think that's his renovated kind of basement area right now that's going to be kind of retrofitted to entertain more recruits. You saw 13 early enrollees there. The only name missing, and I know there were some people, grabbing for their Fred Sanford heart attacks. Maybe Brandon Adams was one of those because they did not see Tyreek Stevenson there. Tyreek, I've been told that he will arrive either today or Wednesday in Athens to join the new Breed 19 or the K-19 class, and that will make 14 members of Georgia's current 22-man recruiting class that will enroll early and are going to start working to be the best Bulldogs they can be this week in Athens.
Yeah, I saw that same picture too, and I guess it would never be my assumption that the turnaround from San Antonio to Athens could be that quick. Presumably, he has to go back to Florida before getting back to Athens. So I guess, I wasn't necessarily expecting him to be, necessarily in Athens by Monday there. It sounds like you're not really either. Not too much to be worried about there in that regard.
Well, he told me over the weekend, even when the world still needed to hear about his decision and it be finalized publicly, is he hadn't done any packing. He had to go home back to the 305, go back home to Miami and South Florida, pack up, and then move to Georgia. So that was probably the delay right there. I mean, some people got right at it. I know Nolan Smith flew back early Sunday morning, went back home to Savannah, and then made the move up to Georgia. Neat little things people can see in that picture. I know Brandon likes to look through these things, but you saw Rylan Godey working pretty well looking pretty well. He didn't have a knee bracer on. He's been moving pretty well for the last couple of weeks. And then you saw Tresman Marshall coming off that shoulder surgery that he finished his high school career with a bum shoulder that probably put him about 70, 75, 80%. He had to have that surgery done. You saw that shoulder in a sling. So that's already a Bulldog that's being rehabbed right there once he gets to campus. Ryan Davis was there in the back. Trouble is also recovering from a knee injury as well. So that was the future of Georgia football. And you talked about cornerbacks, Brandon. To me, maybe this is a way too early cornerback talk for DawgNation from the world headquarters this morning, but I think the 1, 2, 3, what I think at the end of spring practice, the end of fall camp, I think Georgia, should these players fit and be everything they're expected to be, I think a 1, 2, 3 of Eric Stokes, DJ Daniel, and Tyreek Stevenson or Tyson Campbell, that's going to be a pretty formidable three-man look right there for Georgia at cornerback.
That's a really good point. I guess you also have to factor in Devod Wilson to that a little bit, who was on the field a good bit for Georgia in the Sugar Bowl there as well. That should be a fun competition to watch unfold. Jeff, within the game itself for the week, we also saw some other Georgia guys really stand out. Dominic Blaylock catches 2 touchdown passes. He throws one as well. We've mentioned him on the show already today because of that need for Georgia to find its version of Justin Ross or Jerry Jeudy, what these elite receivers have been for their programs. Maybe Blaylock can be that for Georgia. Nolan Smith got to the quarterback a lot. You also saw even more in-depth stuff than that during the practices in San Antonio. What else did you notice? Xavier Truss is healthy again. What else did you notice about all that unfolded there in the build-up to the All-American Bowl and then ultimately what took place inside the Alamo Dome during the game?
Yeah, okay, so let's just roll them off. About 10 seconds on Nolan Smith as he plans to play in a lot of spots. I saw him work with the DBs in warm-ups. He played some inside linebacker. He played some outside linebacker. He was rushing until the point where they started chipping him. Nolan's going to be a very active presence for Georgia and some instant pass rush when he gets on the field. You saw Trevon Walker play a lot on the edge and look very good. That was very interesting, considering I think his eventual future for Georgia is going to be in a 3 technique or a 5 technique as a defensive tackle. There was some terrific one-on-ones between him and Antonio Alfano, the other prized Alabama defensive line target that was there, signee that was there. Those two guys went head-to-head. Xavier Truss, to me, I thought his stock, in my mind, rose the most out of any Bulldog I saw during the All-American events, except for maybe Lewis Stein, because what Xavier Truss did is he lost a lot of weight. He was a 350-pounder going into his senior year. He was down to 315 at the All-American practices, showed a good display of toughness during the week. We've told that story on DawgNation.com already. And then you have, Dominic, who just does Dominic Blaylock things. He flies under the radar. Next thing you know, he's going to have 50 catches for 800 yards and 7 touchdowns in a season. That's the type of years he could put together in Athens. Just really looking forward to being at Georgia. You have Tyreek Stevenson, who played most of that game on Saturday with cramps, very physical, get in your face, press, cornerback, 6'1", 205, also big enough to play the safety spot. I'm glad, Brandon, that you mentioned Mark Webb and Devod Wilson as well into the rotation there for Georgia's defensive backfield. And think pre-Kirby, think first-year Kirby, think now Kirby year 3, team 4. The type of defensive backs Georgia has, Tyson Campbell, Richard LeCount, Lewis Stein, DJ Daniel, Tyreek Stevenson, Eric Stokes, keeps going on and on. This group suddenly gets a lot better, a lot more talented, a lot faster at cornerback, guys that can kind of play all over the field. So, again, 5 Bulldogs were there. You got the possibility there of Doug Nestor. I know Brandon's already thinking about recruiting and moving forward.
Oh, yeah.
Kaiir Elam and Doug Nestor are the guys that we'll think about during the first official visit window of the 2019 recruiting calendar. Those are big names that will visit Georgia in the weeks to come.
Yeah, in fact, let's finish with that right there, kind of where it does stand here in terms of the push for Nestor. You mentioned Elam, who obviously Georgia fans are hoping to get on campus here, win that battle. I'm also thinking about the fact that all of a sudden now McCole Harbin and Riley Ridley's departure, does that help Georgia with a guy like, say, George Pickens? What is sort of the next dominoes that you see falling, even if it's not a commitment leading to a signing right now? What are some of those next big stories that you expect to hear as we roll towards the beginning of February and that official old-school signing day? What's next there and all of that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I think, number one, Georgia has to figure out pretty fast whether they want to pursue a junior college tight end, maybe find somebody for the late signing day, and whether that tight end spot is really compromised with the migration of Isaac Nauta to the NFL and then Luke Ford back home to Illinois. Really, you've got Rylan Goody, who's coming off an ACL. You've got Charlie Warner, and then you've got John Fitzpatrick. Not a lot of elite depth there for Georgia at all anymore at the tight end spot. Does Micaiah Tongue become one of those guys that maybe flops back and forth between tight end, a very physical player, and also wide receiver as a hybrid? I think Micaiah Tongue becomes very interesting for Georgia because Georgia, as you said, just lost those wide receiver targets and all those catches and all that production to the NFL. I think he's going to definitely get a longer look at offense than even a lot of Micaiah Tongue fans thought he might get in Athens. Might be a permanent wide receiver type athlete on the offensive side of the ball now. Other big things to think about, I don't know how quickly this is on everyone's mind. You also have to think about the quarterback spot. The one commitment who did not sign with Georgia during the early period was John Rice Plumlee. Georgia's offered him the blue shirt status, and maybe one of the initial quick questions was when Georgia saw all those guys go to the NFL. Luke Ford moves on. Justin Fields moves on. Everybody's knee-jerk reaction is, of course, everybody would immediately hop to the point that, oh, yeah, Georgia has room for the piano man now. Georgia has room for John Rice Plumlee. As of right now, Brandon, I spoke to him a couple of days ago. That is not the case. There has been no new communication between Georgia and John Rice Plumlee, especially in terms of a change of status for him. So that's something to consider as well. Georgia looks like it's still going to be very tight with numbers for its 2019 class.
All right, really interesting stuff, Jeff. We'll hear more of that tonight at our Marlowe's event, countdown to signing day at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. Can't wait for that. And I know we'll have a lot of this on Wednesday as well, 3 p.m. for the return of Before the Hedges. I love doing these shows around DawgNation. And speaking of that, tell your boys N'Kobe Dean and Louis Scene to stop standing on my corner. I know you published the show yesterday that Scene and Dean did together out there. I'll have you know I'm the one that does the shows around DawgNation, Jeff. I don't want N'Kobe Dean or Louis Scene, two great personalities, to step in here and take my job from me.
Oh, Brandon, they came pretty hard with some pretty good material.
Did.
I would think any show that includes the phrase by a high-profile recruit, "I want to destroy Alabama," is enough to get Brandon Adams to stand down for at least one segment on one day on DawgNation.com.
Yeah, listen, I got no problem with that whatsoever. I was really, really entertained by that, and that's one of the great things about being there on the scene in San Antonio, no pun intended. You have a chance to bring some of that stuff to us, so we'll look forward to seeing a lot of that in the days ahead at DawgNation, the DawgNation video channels, Before the Hedges tomorrow, and, of course, tonight, 6 p.m. at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. If you haven't been to one of our Marlowe's events before, this is the one you want to come to, because this is really one of those where you kind of get some of that inside stuff on what happened in San Antonio. What's next for Georgian recruiting? A lot of that tonight from 6 to 8 p.m. for our countdown to signing day at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. Jeff, I can't wait to see you there.
I got one fun thing for tonight. Want to make sure somebody listens and then shows up. The first person to give Brandon and I a Brandon Adams chuckle, chortle, laugh impersonation live on scene at the Marlowe's. At the Marlowe's Tavern, I'm gonna reward them with at least 2 DawgNation koozies and maybe something else out of the grab bag as well.
Well, that sounds great, Jeff. I appreciate that, and I'll see you there.
All right, guys. See you later.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff from Jeff Sintel, and, you know, a lot of stuff there from Jeff to break down, but I really enjoyed some of the stuff that he said about Micaiah Tongue. Tongue is an interesting guy who I have thought is probably destined for defense. I just think that body type could be really fun in the defensive backfield for Georgia. But as Jeff said, you know, maybe the absence of the tight end now gives Tongue a chance to at least consider that role. The one thing I think about Micaiah, though, would be more of as a pass-catching tight end. What I think that Georgia needs right now is that complement to Werner, who's already a really good pass-catching tight end. You know, maybe it's John Fitzpatrick going into that role. Maybe it's Rylan Godey as a freshman who can really provide that blocking tight end. Georgia plays with a lot of 2 tight end sets. That's an extra blocker in a lot of respects. That's how you get on the field for Georgia as a tight end. It's one of the reasons why maybe Nada didn't always get as many catches as he would have liked to have gotten. And 1 or 2, I guess, to a certain extent on that. So what happens with Georgia in the tight end market is going to be really interesting. Jeff mentioned the possibility of a junior college guy. I'd also suggest that even beyond signing day, a graduate transfer coming over. Some of that stuff will, you know, last deep into the summer, or at least into the spring. That could be really interesting to see. All right, coming up later on in our program, I promised you one of the things that Kirby Smart has said about Zamir White in the past, and White tweeted on Saturday, that's had our attention. The most interesting thing that Kirby's probably ever said about Zamir, he actually probably said by accident. I will share that with you coming up later on. And I'll take some time to address the Jim Chaney rumors. We talked about this yesterday. Mike Griffith had some additional really good reporting on this yesterday. Kind of discuss kind of where all of this is coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, SEC Through Time. Let me mention my friends at MyBookie. Now, I got some grief on Twitter because I guess somebody said I went 0 for 4 with my NFL picks last week. There's a very good chance that I probably did. In fairness to me, when I took Roquan and the Bears, I did say at the time that's probably too many points, but I made the pick. And I told Connor Riley this. He should have never let me take Seattle anyway because I don't follow the league closely enough to know that Brian Schottenheimer is the Seahawks offensive coordinator. I'm a college football guy. I like my football played on Saturdays. Schottenheimer did me in there, but nonetheless, we'll try to do better this weekend. But for now, just know that it's very easy to be better with your picks than I am. And if you are better than me, or if you think you can do better than me, then how about make some money off of that? Especially, you know, with the divisional round this weekend, no better time to get involved with my friends in MyBookie. And right now, they've even got a better offer for you to make it even more enticing because you can really be a winner before you start. Your first deposit can be matched up to 50% when you use the promo code DawgNation. So here's how it works. Type in MyBookie, let your browser do the work for you, MyBookie. They'll find it for you. And then when you get there, just simply use the promo code DawgNation, all one word, spelled the way, as we like to say it's supposed to be. DAWG. And use the promo code DawgNation. Your first deposit can be matched up to 50%. And after that, you play, you win, you get paid. It's as simple as that with my friends at MyBookie, the only sports book we would trust. Just make sure you use the promo code DawgNation. All right, CBS Sports is already out with some 2019 national championship odds for next season. A lot of SEC teams factor into this. Obviously, Georgia very near the top here as well. The two favorites, as you're probably not surprised to hear, Clemson and Alabama. Clemson is at 9-5, which is just slightly less than 2-1. Alabama's 5-2, which is 2.5-1. If you kind of want to know how they're kind of viewing Clemson in comparison to Alabama, Alabama a little more than 2-1, Clemson a little less than 2-1. That's kind of the situation there. You see Ohio State and Georgia. How ironic is that for obvious reasons? Both at 12-1. Michigan at 14-1. Oklahoma looking for a new quarterback at 15-1. You got Texas at 20-1. Nebraska at 25-1. I have no idea where Nebraska comes in on this. Jacob Eason's Washington Huskies at 25-1. Florida at 25-1, which is kind of interesting because the Gators are going to finish this year with a pretty high top 10 ranking. They're going to bring back their quarterback for next season, at least the guy that probably going to be starting for them, and a good bit of momentum. So there'll be some Florida chatter here this offseason. In fact, there's a really good chance that when the final rankings come out, if they haven't already done so, there's a chance that Florida's ranked higher than Georgia. They're number 7. Oh, they tied for 7? I didn't see that. Okay, they tied at 7, so there you go. Georgia wins the game by 19 points, but they essentially tote the same ranking here into the offseason, so kind of interesting on that. Notre Dame, which comes to Athens in September, also at 25-1. Then you get to Oregon, Wisconsin. LSU's at 50-1. I got to tell you, that LSU is way too low. To put LSU right now in the same category of Mississippi State and Auburn, given the fact that LSU brings back its quarterback, I think both those freshman running backs, Ty Davis and John Emery Jr., both play next season. LSU at 50-1. Braden Fajoko just announced he's returning. That's actually a pretty good pick there on LSU. I'm not saying they'll win the national championship, but at 50-1, that's not such a bad deal there. We'll obviously have a lot of time to talk about those kinds of preseason prognostications. For now, though, we'll make that your SEC through. All right. Later on, in like 2 minutes from right now, I want to talk more about the Jim Chaney stuff. Let me go back to earlier in the show, though, because we were talking about the tweet from Zamir White. Zamir White says, the clock is ticking, I'm coming back. And we kind of talked about the kind of cautious approach that Kirby Smart has taken with this when he's discussed this going back to the beginning of the spring. We're not sure what he's going to be able to do. We got to wait and see. Guys like Isaac Nada had seen him during practice, though, in the summer, and they said, you know what, this guy looks pretty good. Sometimes with Kirby Smart, though, it's what he says when he doesn't really mean to that maybe means the most of anything. Let me give you an example of this. You guys remember when Devod Wilson hurt his knee in spring practice, and they were and Kirby was talking about the possibility that maybe Wilson could come back and play before the season was done. As it turns out, that's true. He did play in the Sugar Bowl. But in speaking about Devod Wilson, Kirby Smart also let something slip at the time about Zamir White. At the time, we took this as hopeful news. Then White got another knee injury. But I think this is still relevant when you think about what White could do this offseason as well. Here is Kirby talking about Devod Wilson. But listen to the Zamir White comparison here. Here's Kirby from back during the spring.
I mean, that's a tough injury because he was a kid that was really coming on for us, and we still think he's going to be able to play next year. It's not a matter of being out. There's a lot of guys that come back from that and are able to play, and he's a bright kid. He's a really hard-working kid. We think he'll heal fast, and I mean, if he's at Zamir's pace, we should be able to hopefully get him back.
I'm sorry, what? If he's at Zamir's pace, in other words, a pace so good that we have a reason to be hopeful, that's what Kirby said about Devod Wilson at that time. It's a compliment to Zamir White's injury recovery ability. Now, listen, every injury is different. There is no typical situation. They probably all operate on a slightly different timeline. But if you're a Georgia fan, you want to take the tweet seriously from White over the weekend of the clock is ticking, I'm coming back. In Kirby Smart's own words, you have a reason to believe that. You have a reason to put some trust in that because he said, listen, if one of our other hurt players, in this case Devod Wilson, if he works as hard as Zamir White has, then we feel like he may be able to play before the season is done. The injury recovery tenacity that White showed before, I believe he'll show again, and I think that's a really fun thing to think about for the future. Good stuff from Kirby Smart there. With that said, here on DawgNation Daily, let's turn the page for a moment. We talked yesterday a lot about the rumors involving Jim Chaney and the possibility of being in the mix for a Tennessee job and, something along those lines. And one of the beliefs that was out there was that Chaney's contract had expired at Georgia. If you want to go back to the original DawgNation reporting on Chaney, going back a couple of years ago, it was indicated that Chaney's contract ran out at the end of the 2018 season. We talked to Chip Towers in the show yesterday, said how common would it be for an extension to have been signed and it not made public, and Chip said, hey, there's a possibility it could have happened. Well, apparently that's indeed what has happened based on some reporting that Mike Griffith did yesterday, the first one out of the block to let us know that Jim Chaney indeed last year did sign a contract extension. In fact, I think we have the tweet from Mike Griffith we can show on our screen here. Griffith tweets out, our buddy Mike, the Georgia offensive coordinator Jim Chaney just finished the first year of a 3-year contract per UGA. In other words, he signed that after Georgia made the national championship game in 2017. Now, as many of you have pointed out, that doesn't preclude him necessarily from taking another job, and that's, there's probably a chance that's true. He could still leave and go somewhere else. Guys do, leave out on contracts in the coaching ranks. What I think this should put to bed, though, is the idea that Kirby Smart is somehow dissatisfied with Chaney. That a year ago, he made a 3-year bet on him. Some of you don't seem to like Chaney necessarily, but you shouldn't assume necessarily that Kirby Smart feels that way because he just signed him to a 3-year contract a year ago. And, in fact, Chaney met with reporters not too long ago in the couple days prior to the Sugar Bowl in terms of what some of you view as kind of an up-and-down year for the Georgia offense, but statistically speaking was pretty strong. Chaney seems to feel like that his work was validated by the results on the field for this season. Here is Jim Chaney saying essentially just that.
I feel good about it. As a coach nowadays, when you're clicking around that 40-point-a-game mark, you feel like you've done okay. You're scoring points. When you sit in this chair, you're never happy. We're looking for that perfect game and perfection at all times. Are we content with what we got done? In some ball games. Other games we didn't play particularly well. But I think we did throw the ball a little bit better than we have in the years past, and I do believe that'll continue to grow and continue to develop. And I've talked to you guys a lot about familiarity of offense, and now Jake just ran through his second year in the system, and that shows. That shows. You ask about Jeremiah, third year in the program. Those first 2 years, as we're playing with a bunch of young kids, except for the boys that took off for the draft. And I think I'm most proud of those kids that left for the draft and the quality individuals they are. The young kids stepped back up, and we were able to maintain and continue to achieve some points that we needed to win a few ball games.
So, listen, when you hear Jim Chaney talk there's a word that he uses that I think kind of ties back into something we said off the top of our program today. Chaney talks about familiarity that comes after having been in an offense for the last 3 years, 2 of those years with Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Familiarity also sounds a lot like the word I use, continuity. Where if you look at Clemson, part of its success, its blueprint for success, has been the fact that Brent Venables has been the defensive coordinator for as long as he's been. And he's got a comfort, and the players have a comfort with him. I think if you're Georgia, aspiring to that level of continuity, that level of familiarity, I think it's a pretty nice thing to do. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility to get the job done. But I think in the case of Chaney, he has gotten the job done. So if Chaney were to somehow end up leaving Georgia, I'd take it as bad news because I'm trying to see Georgia, I'm hopeful to see Georgia build the kind of program that coaches want to stay at for a long time to come. By the way, speaking of good news, 801 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten UGA. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you tonight at Marlowe's. And on video, your chance to talk to us about anything you want to from today's program, from recruiting, from the national championship game, and before we start taking comments, I'll kind of restate what I said a moment ago. I just think when you see Clemson win as convincingly as it won last night, and knowing that for the most part it goes about its business with a little less, what's the word I'm looking for? They're just not miserable, right? They're just not miserable. And, Dabo Swinney doesn't strut around like he invented the sport. I got to tell you, that's pretty appealing. And I'm not quite so sure that it wouldn't be nice if Georgia took maybe more of a page out of Clemson's book, maybe a little less so out of Alabama's book. Because, by the way, Saban proved again last night that he didn't exactly invent the sport either, because the fake field goal that he tried and blew up in his face that Chris Fowler essentially predicted right before it happened, because it just seemed so weird to think Alabama would try a field goal in that spot. That was every bit as bad a decision as Kirby Smart's fake punt with Justin Fields in the SEC championship. Maybe a dash of humility might do both those guys a little good from time to time. Nicole House says we need to be focusing on beefing up that defense. Chaney is fine. Get to the quarterback. Yeah, from a statistical standpoint, Nicole's exactly right. statistically speaking, the defense has lagged behind the offense. The offense, in terms of its overall productivity, has outpaced that of the Georgia defense. And you saw last night how effective a pass rush can be, how effective a dominant front seven can be, and I do think that Georgia can look to establish that here this season. I think you're right about that. James Bryant says, speaking of continuity, if Chaney does go, it's imperative that the new offensive coordinator kind of maintain the same kind of system. And I believe that one way or another it will be, because the overall strength of Georgia's roster is its offensive line. That's one of the areas in which you can already say that Georgia is better than Clemson. Now, Mitch Height and guys like that are really good offensive linemen, but the overall depth that Georgia has there is one of the things it ought to lean on. And, last night, if Alabama doesn't get down as early as they did, they were effective running the football against Clemson. But the problem is the score disparity became so great that Alabama couldn't really use the running game anymore. Now, Clemson also got a pretty big stop when the game was still in doubt at the goal line. So from that standpoint, the Alabama running game may have stalled. But for the overall, Alabama was running the ball pretty well. They were getting some gashing plays. But as the score continued to grow in favor of Clemson, Alabama's opportunity to run it became less and less and less. So that's one of the areas in which Georgia can say, hey, we've got a strength that can be really tough for a team like Clemson, even with a good defensive line. They're going to lose most of these guys, but even with a good defensive line, can be tough to stop. But you got to match some of the other stuff too. Mark Cochran says, I think our future and current defensive players are going to be a beast. Yeah, there's plenty of reason to feel really good about them. No doubt about that. Somebody says that Tua didn't really handle losing too well. I didn't really see anything from him there in that regard. Johnson Michael says, BA, will Georgia and Clemson renew the home-and-home game again? So they do have one signed. It's like 50 years from now, but it's like 2028, 2029, 2030. It's two of those 3 years. It's the same time they have a home-and-home with Texas. The problem with that series is that, according to the schedule right now, Georgia's slated to play both Texas and Clemson in the same month in 2029. I have a hard time believing that's actually going to take place. Maybe it will, but I have a hard time believing that 10 years from now, Georgia's going to play a non-conference schedule that includes both Texas and Clemson. If the sport looks then the way it looks now, that's just an impossibility. I think they should be playing tough games like that. All programs should be. But that just seems really weird to think that Georgia would do that. So while it is currently signed for a long time in the future, I think there's a chance that some of those contracts get reworked once the SEC goes to a 9-game conference schedule, which eventually probably will, and once the college football playoff is altered there as well. A lot of these TV contracts will dictate some of this kind of stuff. Somebody had a good comment. Let me read this. Justin and Michelle McGee says, BA, here's a little fun fact for you. The last time Saban took a beating like the one he had last night was 2004 at the hands of Georgia, 45-16. I remember that game. At that point in time in 2004, when LSU came into Athens as the defending national champion, Georgia got all over them that day. David Green, our buddy who's with us a lot, has told great stories about that game of just a dominant Georgia performance. And at the time, that was probably the loudest I'd ever heard Sanford Stadium. I'd never heard Sanford Stadium louder than it was that night or that afternoon. I think it's been louder than that since then, but at the time, this was a raucous, intense atmosphere, and it was so much fun to be a part of. And it was really cool to see Georgia not just beating up a team like that, but beating up the defending national champions like that. It's a great statement. I do remember that game really well. Rick Martin says the pure fact of the matter is UGA is just completely unlucky. Rick, I mean, I'm not going to deny that luck plays a role in some of this kind of stuff. It really does. And it's one of the reasons why, seeing this game last night was, especially in the early going, pretty painful. Now, by the time it kind of got going, I kind of got into it. And this morning when I woke up to watch the rest of it, I was, pretty entertained by what I saw. But when you think about some of the things that have kept Georgia from winning the national championship, some of it their own doing, some of it a little bit of luck, I mean, that kind of stuff does sit uneasy with you. I kind of agree with that, Rick. I do. Let me get a few more Facebook comments, and then we'll go over to YouTube for a moment. Robert Barnes says, those of you who think Chaney should leave, you must understand the whole offensive staff puts the game plan together, and Chaney and Coley are in the box calling plays. I mean, overall, Georgia is an offense that has been built around what its strength is. It's offensive linemen and its running backs. And, last night you saw, why you have to have that extra dimension, which I think Georgia is working towards building. Lawrence had at least 4 plays of 25 or more yards last night, I want to say. I don't know what the total number ended up being, but I feel like I can count up at least 4 plays in which he completed a pass longer than 25 yards. And that's when Georgia's a national championship team. When it's running for what it's running for now, and then adding to that, not the dump-off pass plays here and there, but the 25-yard, deep home run plays. And that's why you've got to have, a quarterback capable of delivering the football and a wide receiver capable of catching and doing something with it once he catches it. Galen Jacobs says, I hope the juniors going out and the way we lost our young players going to the summer trying to prove a point. Yeah, Galen, I hope there is a little bit of an edge to the Georgia program this offseason. Hopefully so. Mark Thornton says Adam Anderson's going to be a beast. Really have a lot of excitement about his future. Bobby Weatherington says, come on, B.A. Clemson fans were so miserable over a win this year that Dabo threatened to leave. They're just like any other fan base. Maybe they are, Bobby, and maybe this is just too much recency bias for me. But overall, it seems like, maybe I need to go back and hear some of the things that Dabo said, because I guess now I am kind of starting to think about, some of this stuff a little bit, because I do remember Dabo saying something along those lines. But if you want to keep it within the confines of the program itself, Dabo seems to be a looser guy than Saban is, and a looser guy than Kirby is. Kirby and Saban are kind of cut from the same cloth. I think that Urban Meyer was very similar, at least in terms of his demeanor, pretty similar in terms of both, Kirby and Saban too. And in Meyer's case, that stuff does not work out well for him because he can't seem to stay at a job very long. And in Saban's case, he's obviously had great success, so much so that you think, well, you've got to be like Saban because he's the only one that's winning anything. But now that's not true anymore. Clemson's beaten him twice now in the last 3 years. All of a sudden now there is the potential of another blueprint worth investigating here. Because one thing about Saban, he's replacing assistant coaches a lot. Different offensive coordinator now for how many years in a row? Position coaches all the time. One of the worst kept secrets in college football is there aren't a lot of people who love coaching with him, or maybe said better, there are plenty of people who don't love coaching with Nick Saban. That maybe there's just a different way of doing this. You may be right about Clemson fans. They may be just as spoiled and intense as Georgia fans or Alabama fans or anybody else. But boy, it sure seems like, because I go back to the Texas A&M game, a game in which Clemson went on the road and did not play very well, could have lost to an A&M team that, was pretty good, but nowhere near as good as Clemson. Doesn't seem like I heard a lot of shocking panic come out of the Clemson fan base over that game in the way that, gosh, I can only imagine what it would be like if Georgia had a situation like that. In some cases, Georgia fans haven't been able to appreciate what were, I think, legitimately good wins this season. Winning at Kentucky. Kentucky turned out to be good. Winning at Florida. Florida's, as Connor mentioned before, going to finish the year ranked number 7 in the country. Georgia won that game in 19 points. And yet, in some of the conversations we have here, it's almost as if Georgia fans can't even acknowledge the good things the program has done. You're probably right to say that fans are fans are fans, and really Georgia fans, Alabama fans, Clemson fans are probably kind of all the same. But I think that Dabo's done a pretty good job of carving out a niche for himself here. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I do vaguely remember that issue. Probably should have mentioned that myself. But I think overall Dabo's done a pretty good job of charting his own course. Ryan Mathis says, I've never quite seen a team like Georgia the Falcons. They dominated a championship game for the majority, and then, bam, the last second they lose. And, yeah, I will tell you that last night I was forced to kind of remember a lot of that kind of stuff of just how close Georgia really was to getting this done. R.J. Rain says, the defensive coordinator, B.A., who's going to be? I would say that there's a better than 50% chance it's going to be one of the guys from in-house. And, if not, obviously the name that I think most fans have gravitated towards have been Derek Ansley. But if I had to, the former Alabama assistant, current Raiders defensive backs coach, but if I had to guess, at the moment, I think there's a better chance that Georgia promotes from within. David Bragg kind of asking the same question. David says, I would imagine if it was in-house, it would have already happened. Not necessarily so, David, because, as we said yesterday, maybe overtures are made to outside candidates like Derek Ansley, and maybe for whatever reason they're just not interested. Maybe some guys like that want to stay in the NFL, or maybe they think they have remember, because we've got a kind of a weird coaching movement thing going on. You know, coaching rumors begat more coaching rumors. So let me just give you one, for instance, here. Why some guys may be wanting to wait. Actually, I'll give you two. Look what happens with Cliff Kingsbury at USC is one example of this. You take one job and then other jobs become available. But also look at what happened when Manny Diaz left Temple to go to Miami. All of a sudden, the Temple job is back open again, which means that a guy like, say, Mike Elko, the Texas A&M defensive coordinator, by the way, his team's going to come to Georgia in November. All of a sudden, now maybe Elko is back involved with the Temple job. Well, when Elko goes there, the Texas A&M defensive coordinator job is opened up, and a movement there will open up another job. So the coaching carousel hasn't quite stopped spinning yet. So I don't know that Georgia needs a defensive coordinator right now. Georgia, certainly was using Mel Tucker with Khair Elam, the defensive back who's still on the board. But ultimately, I don't think hiring a defensive coordinator necessarily helps Georgia with any 2019 signee. So from this standpoint, I don't know that Georgia's behind schedule by having not announced defensive coordinator yet. Maybe I'm being hypocritical, but it seems worse that Tennessee doesn't have an offensive coordinator than Georgia doesn't have a defensive coordinator because just the nature of those different sides of the ball. But overall, I don't even think it's that big of a deal that Tennessee doesn't have an offensive coordinator yet. But nonetheless, I don't think there's some sort of imperative timeline for Georgia to operate under when it comes to getting its defensive coordinator here. Connor Riley joins us. Do you agree? I mean, do you think Georgia's behind schedule in terms of hiring a defensive coordinator?
Not at all. I think again, to bring up Tennessee is a program that I think really needs an offensive coordinator. Just Jerry Pruitt doesn't have a lot of background there. And for whatever reason, they still don't have one. And there's still a lot of chairs moving around. Ohio State made a ton of staff changes on the defensive side of the ball yesterday. Greg Schiano's available.
I don't want to hear a word about Greg Schiano.
The Schiano man is available.
I don't want to hear about Greg Schiano.
So there are a lot of chairs moving. Oklahoma just recently hired their defensive coordinator, hiring away Alex Grinch from Ohio State. So
by the way, did you see that Ohio State hired its defense coordinator from Michigan?
Yeah, Michigan's defensive line coach.
That is really something. That's really something. I mean, do you think that Alabama could hire Auburn's defensive line coach as its defensive coordinator?
I know a few years ago there was some talk about Auburn hiring away Alabama's defensive coordinator to be its head coach. Fortunately for Georgia fans,
that's right, Kirby Smart.
Auburn sort of scuttled that, but I could certainly see that. I don't. It's not like Harbaugh himself, a through and through Michigan guy, is leaving to go to Ohio State.
I mean, I don't think there are a lot of assistants that Georgia Tech could hire that from Georgia's staff that would make them a better program. This is obviously before Jeff Collins, although I think a lot of these guys would be better candidates than Collins would have been. I don't think Tech fans would have wanted to do it. I mean, if you told a Tech fan that you could have Mel Tucker as your head coach. Now, he took the Colorado job. Right now, Colorado's probably a better job than Georgia Tech is.
No, come on. Come on.
I mean, they were in the top 10. Either way, I don't want to get lost.
Georgia Tech made a bowl game this year. Colorado did not.
Okay, either way. Tucker took the Colorado job. I mean, Colorado and Georgia Tech are at least on similar footings as programs.
I don't even know about that.
I mean,
I think you're disparaging Tech a little bit here. I think Tech could be a good job once they, they're not going to be a good team
financial resources are limited.
Yes.
All right. So the point is there are similar jobs.
Access to talent is way easier at Georgia Tech than it is at Colorado.
I'll concede that just to make my point that Tucker took the Colorado job, which means that he would have been a candidate for a job like Georgia Tech. I don't think Tech fans would want any part of having a Georgia defensive coordinator as his head coach. It's weird to think that Michigan, Ohio State, you can have that kind of movement among coaches. You could not have that down here with Alabama, Auburn, Georgia Tech. I mean, people still don't, in some circles, still don't like Greg McGarity because he wants to work for Florida.
I think there are other reasons people don't like Greg McGarity.
Well, be that as it may.
As far as that, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I
found it to be very interesting.
I think smart Georgia Tech fans would be through the roof ecstatic they hired Del McGee to be either their offensive coordinator or even theoretically their
Hush your mouth on that. Hush your mouth. But one more point on the defensive coordinator thing, then we'll take a few more comments. The other thing that we can kind of get lost in the shuffle on, as I said, because when the carousel spins, Mike Elko leaves A&M to go to Temple or something like that. What we don't always also realize is a guy like Troy Brown leaves. Neil Brown leaves Troy to go to West Virginia. Like that Troy job is sitting open. There are a lot of jobs like that are sitting open as well. If you're a guy like, I don't even want to say Derek Ansley by name here because I don't have anything to report on that, but I mean, if you're one of these guys that could potentially be a defensive coordinator at Georgia, it's not a far-gone conclusion to think you might be a head coach at some lower-level institution as well. It's a lot of these lower-level head coaching jobs that are open that, that might prohibit some of these guys from wanting to take jobs, right away.
Right. Well, Del McGee a few years ago, he was a candidate for the Georgia Southern job, and I wonder, and he's very much, familiar with that section of the state and with, Alabama and that area. So, he's certainly, I think, again, a name to watch there for that Troy job, as you've mentioned before.
All right, let me pop over here and get a few Facebook comments here as well. Brian Mills, I didn't know this, that Bo Schembechler, the legendary former Michigan coach, was on the Ohio State staff for 5 years before landing the head coaching job at Michigan. I did not know that. I think it's probably easier to do that back then than it is in modern times.
I would agree, yeah.
But I did not know that Schembechler worked for Ohio State. Tyler Stanfield says, we need a spread offense to be able to compete with Clemson and Alabama. That's not my takeaway from last night's game. It's really not. My takeaway from what I saw from the Clemson offense was Georgia needs a player like Justin Ross, and maybe Dominic Blaylock can be that guy. Maybe Georgia still can sign a 2019 receiver that has a chance to be that guy. That was really my takeaway from that. It's not the fact that, because I don't think that Clemson was baffling Alabama with its spread. I think that Trevor Lawrence was taking shots deep downfield, and there is nothing with the current Georgia offense that prohibits it from doing the same thing. Fromm, I think, took major leaps forward with that in that regard this year. But, there are moments in which the Alabama secondary was made to look terrible by Clemson last night, and you don't need a spread offense to be able to do that. And in fact, I think that Clemson did a much better job of that. I don't know the overall stats. I might, go back and change my mind. I think Clemson did a better job of that last night than what we think of as a more spread-oriented team like Oklahoma did in the Orange Bowl.
I would agree. Matt Regavina pulled up the stats for us. Trevor Lawrence last night, 20 of 32, 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, no pick. Just did whatever he wanted to last night.
Rick Martin also reminds us that Brian Bohannon, who I believe is the current Kennesaw State coach, was also a Georgia player before going to Kennesaw State. J.C. Howell says I should take notes from Connor. J.C., maybe I will.
No, you don't know. I'm not the kind of kid you want to copy off of.
James Bryant says, can Fromm throw it 60 yards? I don't know that there are that many moments in a game where you're throwing it 60 yards in the air anyway. But can you, can you hit a big wide open receiver on the money, let him, turn it into an even bigger play? I think Fromm is certainly capable of doing all that kind of stuff. Philip Jordan Wells says Clemson's receivers are built to beat Alabama. And based on what you saw last night, Philip, there's no doubt that's true. I also thought it was really interesting how Clemson's defensive philosophy just had Tua so baffled that, other than a couple plays, we didn't hear Jerry Jeudy's name really mentioned much at all. Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith. A lot of what Alabama was doing with its passing game last night was really underneath. It was very short. It was very kind of deliberate. I just don't think that Tua felt comfortable standing there and peering deep down the field. I don't think he thought he had time to do that last night.
I know that the stats, 295 yards, 2 touchdowns. Tua was bad last night. Tua was not good. He was inaccurate. He was not shortly, but just, ball placement wasn't fantastic. And, I think it's certainly on some of the goal line stuff, maybe you would have liked to see him, maybe try and take control more, because there were times, especially late in the game, where it was 1 4th down. He ran that ill-fated speed sweep to the left. There was another time they called a pass play, and he was trying to scramble for it, and he, comes up short. Tua did not play very well last night, and that's the second time against elite defenses, which is, as he progresses and eventually moves on to the NFL, he's gonna that talent disparity is just gonna shrink.
Yeah,
and it has to be very concerning when it's the second time in a couple of weeks he's been clearly outplayed.
And then my memory of the LSU game, another really good defense that he would have seen this season, is that wasn't a great game for him either. Now, they ended up winning the game in somewhat blowout fashion, but he threw a pick in that game there as well. I mean, I hate to be such a prisoner of the moment here, but I do find myself this morning rethinking a lot of the Tua Tagovailoa season, which would seem, so historic for the first half of the season. But when you look at Tua against LSU, against Georgia, and Georgia was for the most part handling him just as well as Clemson was. It ends up getting written off as an injury situation, but Georgia knocked Tua Tagovailoa out of that game. Obviously what Clemson did last night. I mean, I think it's very fair to say that Tua was not his best against the best defenses that he saw, and that's not a coincidence.
I would agree with that completely.
Johnson Michael also brings up an interesting point in the Facebook comment section, which is that Georgia really played as well as Clemson, similar, effect against Alabama, but obviously, Clemson finishes and Georgia didn't. I mean, it's one of the things that made last night such a painful experience for me for most of that game because Georgia was just close to being able to get this done. And obviously, if Georgia gets a chance to go up 17, if the field goal is made, maybe that's a little bit different. There are other moments you can point to where Georgia had a chance to kind of put that final nail in the Alabama coffin. There are a couple of times last night where I thought that Clemson left the door open for Alabama. When Clemson missed its own extra point, keeping it to a 21-point game as opposed to going up 22, I thought that was an opportunity for Alabama. But to Clemson's credit, every time Alabama tried to do anything, long, clock sustaining drives, Clemson got it stopped and then made its own big plays on offense. There's no doubt that Clemson did a better job of finishing, of closing last night, of staying intense. I'm not saying Georgia lost its intensity. I think that a lot of things happened for Georgia in the SEC championship game. But, the second half, which I did expect to be a big performance from Alabama, I thought they were going to come roaring back last night. And Clemson just did not allow that to happen. You got to give them a lot of credit for that.
And to your point on finishing, Alabama had a number of drives stall out inside that 25, 20-yard line, red zone area. And that's really the difference of the game. The ill-fated fake field goal was in between the 25 and 20. They had two different drives end in the red zone. If they're scoring touchdowns on those plays, which is something you have to expect, it's something you have to do when you get in that portion of the field every time. I told you many times before the Georgia-Alabama game, Georgia's not winning that game if they're kicking field goals. In these high-pressure games, if you're down in that red zone area, you have to score touchdowns. That is how you win. Clemson did that last night. Alabama did not.
P-Man127C in our YouTube comment section also says, had Tua stayed in the game against Georgia in the SEC championship, the same result would have happened, that Georgia would have coasted to an easy victory. It was the presence of Jalen Hurts that changed things for Alabama.
I do agree with that
I would
point.
suggest it's also the absence of DeAndre Walker.
If Tua finishes that game against Georgia, Georgia beats Alabama.
It's really interesting to think about, man. It's tough to think that 2 years in a row now Georgia may have been that close to have it, not being what it was. Kristen Phillips says Clemson went for the kill shot instead of trying to run the clock. Boy, they really did. They were going for that juggler last night. That was a great thing to.
And as someone who loves, sort of just mash you in the face football, Clemson's final drive lasted 10 minutes. They drained the entire 10-minute clock. Alabama didn't touch the football in the last 10 minutes of the game.
Double R says, honestly, BA, do you really think that Dominic Blaylock is in the mold of a Justin Ross? I think he'll be a good receiver, but I can't see him on that level. The honest truth is there was a reason why I talked about Jaden Hazelwood as much as I did. I think that Hazelwood is very clearly in a Justin Ross type mode, a Jerry Jeudy mold, who I also think is a really good receiver. I think Dominic Blaylock can be, but I'm not quite as sure about Dominic Blaylock. I think he can be. I just not quite as confident. I do have to be candid about that. I mean, Connor, you watch these high school kids very closely. How do you compare a Ross and a Blaylock?
They're just, body type, they're completely different.
That's true.
But I think if you watch a lot of NFL football, the best guys other than DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham is around 6 feet. Antonio Brown is around 6 feet. Adam Thielen is around 6 feet. Those are guys who, and I think Blaylock can model himself after. A lot of people want to peg him as this slot guy. He's a guy who can win on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what, if you're a Georgia fan, you're looking for him to do consistently, because that's what Ross was doing last night. That's what Jeudy was doing over the course of the regular season.
Let me also ask you about a point that I made earlier in the show, and I'd love for other people to comment on this as well. We've already had some good ones on this. I do think that Dabo Swinney is an attitude worth emulating here. I do think there's something somewhat refreshing about him not taking himself quite as seriously as Nick Saban takes himself and as Kirby Smart takes himself. I think there's an approach here where you can be as white-knuckled as you want to be and still not win, and Dabo's when he seems to be going the opposite side of this, where he seems to just be a little looser. The team itself seems to have a little more fun. They've got the putt-putt course, for instance, in their football facility. The slide. That doesn't feel like the kind of thing Alabama would do. It feels like they'd have, $1 million whirlpool, to sort of make injury recovery easier. Clemson seems to be, at least to me, and as what one commenter's already said, maybe I'm overstating this, but at least to me, it seems like Clemson's found a way to have more fun with this. Do you think teams like Georgia, fan bases like DawgNation, do you think, Alabama, are we just not having enough fun?
We're definitely not having enough. I mean, it's sports. Like, at the end of the day, there's no reason to get all this mad and upset. And, yes, you can get upset about it, but, to turn it vitriolic, to, lash out and scream at people, the stuff that happened with Cody Parkey, the Bears kicker, like, there's just no need for that. Like, it's sports. Let's keep it fun. If Georgia won the national championship, I'm telling you, DeAndre Walker's not giving Kirby Smart a wet willy like Christian Wilkins did last night. DeAndre Baker, actually, Jamari Sawyer might have tried to recreate the 1995 Source Awards with Suge Knight because he did that for a DawgNation video.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know if you guys saw that, but Ceylon Farrell sort of alluded to that. But yeah, I kind of wish, and so the whole thing with the Georgia players tweeting, my backlash to that is a lot of people were criticizing these Georgia players for, opening up, being themselves, voicing their opinions. And while ultimately it didn't work out well, like, I do think we should try and see more of, like, these are who these people really are. These are what these guys really think. And, I'm okay with them speaking their minds, tweeting their minds in this case. And unfortunately, it just didn't work because they didn't show up in the first quarter.
Yeah.
But, if you want to see players be more open and be more themselves, I think you want to see Dabo have a little bit more success than, say, the Nick Saban model.
Let me take a couple of comments on this. Al Birchfield seems to agree with me. Owen Pryor in our Facebook comment section says, I'm basing too much of this on the small sample size of last night. Owen, you may be right about that. I guess, and this is the opinion I haven't quite formulated yet, I guess I am thinking about this in two regards right now. On the one hand, it seems really attractive how little recruiting drama Clemson seems to have. And yet I'll be the first to admit, I want to see Georgia sign better classes than Clemson signs. So I can't fully buy into this. But this idea that they don't, entertain a recruit for months and months and months only to have that guy flip to LSU or flip to Oklahoma or flip to wherever. I got to admit there's a certain aspect of that to me this morning feels, pretty attractive. But at the same time, if Georgia's recruiting class looked like Clemson's, I'd be disappointed. So I would be. I mean,
you'd be disappointed with 5-star Trevor Lawrence.
But I mean, when you go into these deals, though, obviously looking back on it, you're glad to have Trevor Lawrence as it turns out to be now. But Clemson, they don't get Clay Webb, they don't get Jamari Sawyer, they don't get a lot of these guys. If I looked at Clemson's recruiting class on paper, and if I was a fan of that team, I'd find myself saying, that's not enough talent. These guys may be good. I don't trust your individual evaluation of any of these players. I don't trust your scouting report to be that precise. Jeff said this a moment ago. I love stockpiling. Give me 4 offensive tackles so I can find 2. Give me 8 linebackers so I can find 3. Give me huge numbers so I can cherry pick from that group who truly is the best of the best. Clemson doesn't do that. There's an aspect of that seems really attractive to me. It's a drama-free approach to recruiting, at least on paper, seemingly. But the average Clemson class, for me, would not seem good enough.
I will counter with Clemson is 55-4 over the last 4 years.
But we're talking about two different things. The results speak for themselves. I'm saying on paper it doesn't seem like it should add up.
At a certain point, you just have to trust and understand that, Dabo Sweeney and his staff are really good at making evaluations. And as frustrating as it might be that you're not signing 8 guys, or so you're not signing the Xavier Trusses, the Warren McClendons, those guys. You just have to trust that these guys are experts, that they know what they're doing, that they know what they're looking for.
I think we're talking about two slightly different things. Because what I'm saying is I would love to be able to put my faith and trust in, what? Georgia's going to go out and get the players it needs, and it's not going to worry about the ones that it misses. What I'm saying is emotionally, I don't know that as much as I would like to get there, I don't know that I can get there because
you're never going to be happy.
Instinctively, it's a lot easier to be like Alabama and say, Georgia got to get the 25 best players he can get, and it's got to run out a bunch of players in the program to get even better players. It's got to just keep maximizing. Instinctively, that's what unfortunately feels more right than the – Jeff said it himself. If Clemson brings in a player, he ends up not being good, the coaches don't blame the player, they blame themselves, and they let that guy sit on the roster for 4 years. Can you imagine Alabama doing that? And can you imagine Georgia trying to be like Alabama and doing that? I mean, it's just a very different thing.
Well, but you say you want programs and stuff to, be more fun, be more like Dabo. I think the reason Clemson is what it is, and that sort of fun atmosphere is they're a family. I know a lot of this is pumped up and overblown in media and stuff. I truly believe that Clemson atmosphere creates a family type atmosphere, whereas the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world, this is a business. It's a business. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's business. It's not personal. It's just business. And, I don't think you can have it both ways where you say you want coaches to be more fun and, have it be more about the kids and that sort of thing. And then also say, I want to sign all the best players. Like, I think, you have to try and pick and choose. And, I think I personally like Dabo's way. I think Stanford does something similar where, Stanford can't get the guys that they want to get, obviously, the academic requirements and just location. But, we're going to, bring you in and develop you, and if you don't work out as a football player, that's fine. Like, we're going to develop you as a human being as well and not try and necessarily churn you out for someone who's going to be a better football player.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point here is that as much as I say, boy, it'd be really nice to loosen up and have a lot of fun and have more fun, be a little bit more like Dabo Swinney. The overall point I'm trying to make is that's not as easy to do as it seems like it should be. Loosening up and letting go and letting the chips fall where they may, trusting your own evaluation, saying the guys that really want to be here are the guys that we really want. Coaches say that kind of thing all the time. That attitude, adopting that attitude, is just not as easy to do as you might think. For sure. Anyway, over on the Facebook comment section, we'll get a few more here. J.C. Howell says, BA, would you be okay with trading Clemson's past 4 recruiting classes and 2 national championships for Georgia's past 4 years? I think I would. But, J.C., you're missing the point. What I'm saying is, without the benefit of hindsight, going into the seasons, what I think I know about college football would have led me to believe that Clemson's not recruiting well enough. Clemson's obviously an outlier. Clemson's obviously, the results speak for themselves. They're obviously producing success. My point here is that this is not what I could have ever predicted to happen based on what they're doing. And, before you say, well, it just goes to show that recruiting, rankings, recruiting scores, aren't the end-all be-all. For the most part, it's only Clemson who's the outlier here. Pretty much every other, champion, every other contender, for the most part, looks exactly the same way because really, a program like Ohio State does things exactly the way that Georgia and Alabama do. So I mean, it's only Clemson here who sort of carved out this unique niche for itself there in this regard. So obviously you'd trade the 2 national championships, you'd trade the the overall success of the rosters, you'd obviously make that trade. My point is that looking forward without the benefit of history here, it just on paper doesn't look like it should be enough. It's just kind of an amazing deal. Todd David Brown talking about Zamir White. We mentioned him earlier in the show. It's going to be fun to watching him on the field here this season. Jermaine Morrell says, BA, do you think the Hazelwood flip was related to Justin Fields? I really do. I think ultimately those two guys really liked each other. And obviously they're not going to play in college together. But the one thing they had in common was they both decided they didn't want to be at Georgia anymore. So I do think they are heavily related. Justin Sisk says, here's the dang point. If their D-line doesn't come back, they don't win a national championship. And, obviously those guys choosing to come back, that certainly helped. But Clemson's also been in the last 3 playoffs. So this is not just 1 year of them getting lucky with some guys who could have gone to the NFL coming back. They've been in the playoffs now 4 years in a row. So this is more than just a 1-year story here. Mike Anderson says Clemson's developing and coaching better, BA. Maybe they are just really good at, you have to also add to that, evaluating talent. Because one of the things that Clemson does not lose, lose out on is that even though that they are very careful about who they offer scholarship to, they're not afraid to offer those scholarships relatively early on. They do get involved early in guys. One of the things that's given them an advantage. Maybe they are just really, really good at talent evaluation.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the same reason they landed Deshaun Watson was the same reason they landed Trevor Lawrence, and that they just identified them before Georgia.
Steve Schaffini also says there's more to national championships than just recruiting rankings. There is obviously more to it than that, but you're going to have a hard time finding anything, not just in college football, anything in sports more closely connected than recruiting rankings and final season rankings. There's virtually nothing else in any sport anywhere that predicts success more than recruiting rankings. It's just a science. It's an absolute verified science. Clemson, though, is a bit of an outlier. And as Jeff said, they're still bringing in 4- and 5-star players. They're just not bringing in the same high numbers that some of these other programs are. Bobby Weatherington says, BA, this is because they play in the weak Atlantic Cakewalk Conference. We make the playoffs every year, too, if Georgia was in the ACC. I think it does help Clemson to have an easy ride into the playoff. I don't think that there's any doubt about that. It's one of the reasons why Dabo Swinney has been so outspoken in favor of maintaining the 14 playoff. He knows the system's working well for him. But you can't really hang the ACC thing on Clemson right now because of the way they walloped Alabama. It's a little easier to do that last year when with Kelly Bryant, they can't throw the ball down the field once they get into that game against the Crimson Tide. But while Clemson's conference doesn't do much to validate itself, Clemson, apart from that league, has certainly validated itself in a big way here. Don Williams says that Justin Ross was a heavy recruit out of Alabama, and it showed last night. Yet going into that state and getting Ross last year is an example of a huge win. So let's not make it sound like they don't ever get big recruiting wins. They get some major ones. It just seems like they get just enough to really get it done. Jeremy Howard says they also beat A&M, South Carolina, and Alabama. They played 3 SEC teams and beat them all. A little close there in College Station. Other than that, they certainly did pretty well. Robert Barnes also talking about the continuity. It's something we addressed off the top of the program. Keeping Brent Venables for as long as Clemson has is a big deal for them. There's no doubt about that. It's one of the reasons why around here we're always so hopeful that Georgia can find a way to keep Dale McGee as running backs coach for longer. Can you pay him well enough that he's not enticed to leave? Sam Pittman, who has been a little bit of a journeyman coach over the course of his career, can you make this be the kind of place that he wants to retire at? And for these young up-and-coming defensive coaches like Schumann and Lanning, eventually they may want to be head coaches, but can you find a way to make them want to stay at Georgia as long as they can? Trey Scott probably included there. That's Georgia's challenge right now. Kibo Weir says, give the YouTubers more action. I'll apologize. I'll go here to the YouTube comment section here for a moment. Taiwan Taylor says, okay, we see the key to beating Alabama is throwing the ball downfield. Can UGA throw the ball downfield? I certainly think that this year the Georgia passing game proved itself to be pretty capable, and Fromm made some big throws against Alabama. But you certainly see that when you can find a way to block that Alabama front seven and challenge the Alabama secondary, you obviously put yourself into a situation where you have a chance to do some things. We're going to get ready to get out of here in just a second. We're not going to go quite as long today as we did yesterday. Scott Pete says, okay, so how many days till we beat the Gators again? Listen, I can't wait for that to get here. That game's going to be a pretty big deal. Pretty big deal by the time you get to October and that game is played. Kristen Phillips says Facebook is all the teachers' pets. That's not true. I try to take
the YouTube commenters are very more like aggressive and so
I tried to take some YouTube comments earlier. Y'all were all talking about something different besides the subject at hand, so I had to go back over to Facebook. But yeah, we love our YouTube commenters, and we got to start taking some Twitter comments eventually. That's going to be the real challenge because some of y'all know, I'm barely smart enough to find my way into the studio every morning. If I'm having to try to toggle like 3 browsers at one time on my laptop, that may get tricky. But the Twitter audience is starting to grow here, so we may do that at some point in time. Pine Saw Lemon Scent, Enrique Murillo, thanks for the kind words. Kelly Burnett says, before I go, we usually have a great crew over here. Kelly, the YouTube comments are always a lot of fun. Honestly, my favorite part of my day, all day long, no matter what I do, are these moments where we get to take these comments because I like seeing the stuff that y'all bring to the table that is a little different than what I would have brought to the table. Challenging me on my opinions, challenging me on some of the things I've said. I love that kind of stuff. It's always great. Really good. Thank you all so much. Let me pop over to Facebook. We'll say goodbye there, and we'll get ready to go. Don Williams also talking about Demetrius Robertson. He is a guy that now, one of the things you saw from Ross last night was there's a physicality he brings to the table. He's a little bit like, I think that J.J. Holloman is really strong. I think the way that Holloman can pull the ball out of the sky with one hand shows his strength. The one thing that Ross also showed is that one-hand ability last night. But almost like a basketball player, he's good at those body turns. He can use his body to, affect his opportunity to make catches. He did a good job of that last night. That's one of the things I want to see for Robertson, because we know that he's got the speed to run past people. But can he use his body to his advantage? You don't have to do that in the Pac-12 as much. In the highest level of sort of deep South college football, Clemson included, you got to do more of that kind of stuff. And so that's one of the things I think that Robertson's going to have to learn. On one of the biggest plays of the night last night for Justin Ross, he got off of press coverage at the line of scrimmage. And you'll say, well, the guy got hurt. Let me tell you something. Justin Ross had already blown that play wide open before the injury happened. That's the other thing that Robertson's got to show. Can you get off at the line of scrimmage? And if he does, then he has a chance to really be a part of that conversation next year, along with the Dominic Blaylocks and J.J. Holloman taking the next step with his career. So I think he has a chance to be in that. All right, we're going to go. We'll see at Marlowe's tonight. 6 p.m. Going to be a lot of fun. Marlowe's in Dunwoody. What a great event that's going to be. Countdown to signing day. Jeff Sintel will get ready for it all for you there. And we'll see you back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily. Y'all have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.